All right, I think we're live now. Thank you guys. Welcome back to UOS. The next session here is OpenStack Charm Integrated Functional Testing and Development Cycle. This is in the UOS Ubuntu Cloud 2 room. If you'd like to follow along as well in IRC. I've got with me a lot of the OpenStack Charming team. They're here to discuss this with you guys. So I guess if you will all please introduce yourselves and feel free to get started.
I'll go first. I'm Ryan Beisner, and I do testing and all kinds of fun stuff with the OpenStack charms in the OpenStack engineering team. Today we're going to talk a bit about the development cycle of our charms and how we approach the validation of those charms with functional testing.
Hi there, I'm Liam Young, or Ganoy on IRC, and I spend my time working on the OpenStack charms and yeah, deploying clouds.
We deploy lots of clouds.
We do, deploy lots.
My name's Corey Bryant, and I split my time between packaging for OpenStack and working on the OpenStack charms.
I'm James Page. I'm tech lead of the OpenStack engineering team, so I work with all these fine gentlemen on this Plus Hangout, and I generally do packaging and charms and anything else that needs doing, so I'm the glue.
Right, okay, cool. So I guess it was about a year ago when the Trusty release came around, we started to really put a lot of effort into the functional testing, which are essentially integrated tests that are contained within each of the charms. The goal being to provide a gating mechanism for the charm developers and to be able to feed that into an automated CI type of system where authors of new features and charm reviewers alike can have a sense of confidence that the changes that they're proposing are not going to break something else or break somebody else. And so that being the kind of the core driver of the functional tests, it also makes it nice for the author as they're writing new features or adjusting the way a charm works to be able to run those type of tests locally or on various cloud substrates. So I have an amulet test fired up, and I also have a full stack deployed, and I thought I would kind of start with a little bit of a visual representation of that just to kind of understand what our approach is for this. Let me do a screen share. There we go. Everybody seeing this okay?
That's a lot of boxes.
That's a lot of boxes. Okay, so here is an OpenStack cloud. All of your usual things. You've got kind of, you know, your Keystone, MySQL, things at the core with RabbitMQ, and then depending on which flavor of a cloud you've deployed, you're going to have things like Ceph and Swift and Dashboard, maybe even Heat and Ceilometer. And so this is the cloud that we deploy, I don't know, 10, 20, 30 times per day, depending on how much activity there is. And so what we're able to do is substitute a merge proposal of a charm for any of these given charms and kind of throw it at the wall and see how it sticks. For the OpenStack functional testing, what we really try to exercise in those integrated tests are the things that a charm have in common with the other charms, right? And so as you can see, there are a lot of relations involved in bringing up an OpenStack cloud, and it can be quite complex to test. So if we take one, for example, Cinder, I've got fired up in another window. If we look at Cinder and want to be able to know, okay, am I about to break something, or does my change work with the existing cloud? The integrated test that we have is a basic functional check that will exercise the relations between that charm and its related charms. It'll also do some functional exercises in the case of Cinder, such as bringing up volumes and also checking authentication and those kind of things. We'll go ahead and switch over to an amulet test scenario that we've got deployed. So if you look at the test code for the Cinder charm, this is what you end up with if you were to add the Juju GUI back into that deployed environment. And so at the center of what we care about for that test is of course Cinder. And each of the green lines represent relations to kind of a minimal working set, an abstract of that cloud. And so this allows us to do kind of rapid cycle, fail fast type of testing. So if you look at the Cinder charm, right, it's got basically 4 relations. Each of those other things that it's related to may have other dependencies to become a functional test environment. And so if we switch gears, let me cruise over to, not that, there we go. Cruise over to a different screen share. Here we go. I've got that particular Juju GUI that we just looked at is represented here by the Juju status in the nice new tabular format, right? So we're exercising this charm using all of the usual tools, MAS or the OpenStack provider in this case, the Juju tools that are current. As you can see, we're using 1.23.2 version of Juju, and you can see each of those charms that are deployed. I'm going to go ahead and kick this thing off. It takes about a minute or so for it to come into some demonstratable actions where it's going to fire up some instances, not instances rather, volumes it'll create, and some glance images alongside that. So this particular test uses the charm helpers amulet class and extends that. Thank you very much, Corey, putting that together. So I'm not going to go through the code in detail, but basically, you know, we can define all of the various services in kind of classic amulet approach, and then you define each of the relations and such, much like you would in a bundle. So while that's going, and I'll just leave this screen up, I thought I'd touch on the use of bundle tester and how we're probably going to be making some minor adjustments in the test definitions within the OpenStack charms. So the bundle tester is what the Juju charm store and the Juju CI use to execute a test plan, which can be expressed via a testplan.yaml in the test directory. So it's pretty handy to be able to define different sets of tests that you want to run in different scenarios. And I think this cycle we're probably going to switch to more of a multi-phased test approach. And in that, basically, the first phase will be this basic type of test, such as what Cinder is here. And then once we reach a certain level in the merge proposal, we can kick off more in-depth tests. So on the screen, you can see that this amulet test is doing some exercises. Basically, it will create a Cinder volume. It's going to import a glance image. Then it'll make a Cinder volume based on that glance image. Then we'll do some things like cloning, snapshotting, and then creating a new volume from a snapshot. So it basically exercises all of those little things that you may not exercise in every single cloud. So we try to have as, you know, the best kind of basic use case coverage as we can. And so if we were to watch this, you'll see them fire up and you'll see them disappear, and then the test passes. So that's pretty much the demo side of this session. I also wanted to shift gears a little bit, I think, and talk about the charm development process and what a contributor can expect coming into the OpenStack charms. And I think that James will probably be able to, you know, give us a bit of info on that, or I can as well. I'll just let this go and switch back. James, if you want to jump in, feel free.
Sure. Do you want me to just run through on the current dev?
Yeah, I think
Yeah,
that's good. I'll go ahead and link out in the IRC channel the OpenStack charm development policy and also the Cloud Archive support matrix,
Sure.
just for reference.
Okay, so OpenStack charm development. So for the last 12 months or so, we've been doing our OpenStack charm development on a fairly fixed cadence. So rather than dropping changes into the stable charms in the charm store as and when they're ready, we originally put in a 6-month dev cycle, completely aligned with Ubuntu, but then we found that was resulting in a little bit of a feature starvation, and we could actually iterate slightly faster than that. So we're now working a 3-month cycle. So we do a Ubuntu released aligned release of the OpenStack charms, which nicely coincides with OpenStack as well. And we do an interim release 3 months into the dev cycle. The 15.01 one was very predominantly bug fixes with only a few features, but I don't expect that to be the norm. I think we'll get a lot of feature enablement in that interim release going forward as well. So that's broadly the policy we operate, where we run that via branches on Launchpad. All of the charms in the charm store are branches on Launchpad somewhere right now. We may be changing that going forward, but we've got some work to do on that this cycle. But we also run what we call our next branch. So for each of the charms, there's also a next branch under the OpenStack Charmers team, and that's the focus of development for any charm during the dev cycle. So fixes must always land there first, even for what we call a stable update, which I'll talk about in a second. But that's where all the new features land. That's where you can pick the latest and greatest. That's where all the CI runs, so that what Ryan just ran us through in terms of smoke testing, charm changes as they come down the pipeline. That's all happening against our next branches. It doesn't mean we can't update stable charms in the charm store, between releases, in the same way as we can do stable updates into Ubuntu. So for that, we have a very similar policy that a fix must be applied into the next branch first. And once it's there, it can then be backported into the stable branch. It needs an associated bug. It needs like a test plan on how you're going to, ensure it's exercised adequately, and then that can be backported, stable, as long as there's sufficient low risk of regression, either by good testing or it's a minimal change of some description. It's fairly safe. Then we'll backport that to the stable branches and fix up issues in the current stable charms in the charm store. And that's broadly our development process right now. So if you want to get involved with that, Ryan has linked both of the dev policy, the dev policy for OpenStack charms, and you can read more there, and you can find Gnoi or myself, James Page, or Corey or Ryan on in the Juju channel on Freenode IRC. That's a good place to ask questions if you want to get involved.
Thanks, James. So if you were following along the screen share, it did what we thought it would. It created a few things, tested them, deleted them, and now we're exercising something that I haven't talked about yet in these functional tests. The amulet tests are meant to be somewhat black boxy, right? As a does it work type of test, but we also want to be measuring things in terms of relations and relation data, and also inspecting configuration file data based on that relation data. So what we do is we dump the relation data between two charms and compare that with the expected places for that data to land within the charms configuration file, sender.conf, for example. And so that gives us another layer of break detection along the way, especially in times of change, such as Juno and Kilo, where there were a lot of template file changes. This kind of allowed us to identify some breakage early on and get that fixed before it became an issue in some of the charms. So that's quite handy to be able to do. I think it might be worthwhile, guys, to talk about Mojo a little bit and how we use that kind of framework, if you will, to do the next level of testing beyond this functional testing. Because what these amulet tests are is from the charms perspective itself, right? On a higher level, we want to be able to do full cloud deploys and exercise things in a higher level way. So I don't know if Liam, if you want to chip in on the Mojo spec thing, it's pretty cool.
Yeah, absolutely. So Mojo is is a tool that we use to, as Ryan said, is to do a full deployment and then manipulate that deployment in various ways. And you can get more. You can have a look at Mojo at mojo.canonical.com. I'll just plug that into the panel. So a typical kind of test that we would do with Mojo is we'd do a full cloud deployment, check that it's up. We tend to use a slightly lighter set of tests than Tempest, but we are going to add Tempest support as well to our Mojo specs. So we fire up a typical spec would be we'd fire up a cloud and then we'd upgrade all the charms. So we'd do a deploy on stable, and then upgrade everything to the next branches, and check that's worked. We've got specs to kill nodes, kill units in the service, and reintroduce them. We can upgrade charm helpers, or even upgrade the OpenStack release as well. And it'd be really we're still kind of developing these specs at the moment. They're not as far-reaching as they could be, but it would be really nice to get to a point where we can simulate particularly hard racy bugs. We can use Mojo to try and expose those. We can also, if somebody's deployed their cloud with a bundle, we can, and this isn't really so much Mojo specific, but if people have deployed their cloud with a bundle, we can take that bundle and deploy a copy of their cloud, and see and try and pinpoint any issues that they're seeing as well. So Mojo is not OpenStack charm specific. It's used to exercise all manner of Juju deployments, and it's used a lot by our internal IT team who support services using Juju on top of OpenStack, and they also use it to test any changes that are coming up in their deployments. So again, scaling that service out or reducing it or anything like that, Mojo is a great tool for testing that.
So I might add that the bare metal testing that we do is driven through Mojo Spec. That was a new addition this last cycle, and so that is something that's important. Most of the testing that we do, I'd say the velocity of the testing is done on top of OpenStack, right? Because we're mostly more concerned with exercising the code. That's not to say that the bare metal testing is unimportant. It certainly is, and so orchestrating that, if you will, or automating it through Mojo has been pretty cool. And the way that we've got these Mojo specs arranged, a person can go in and make a new Mojo spec with great ease, really. You just have 2 or 3 files to modify, to substitute a different bundle, or add some test cases, or charm sources, if you will. So the Mojo test thing is pretty cool. I particularly like the charm helpers upgrade test. Right? So if we have 20 charms, or however many there are, and we want to know if we resync charm helpers, is the world still going to be okay? And that's what this charm helper Mojo spec does. Is it branches all of the charms, it does a charm helper sync on all of the charms, and then it does a deployment. And so that's quite useful for the guy that's about to sync charm helpers across all of these charms, to know he's not getting ready to break something. Right, Liam?
Yeah, absolutely. And also, if you're working on the charms and you're enabling a new feature, and that feature needs, a really good example would be I've just been working on enabling layer 3 HA and DVR neutron features in the charms, and it's really useful to be able to write a Mojo spec to deploy with that topology and then run tests against it. So killing gateways and making sure connectivity's guests are still there, because I can then give that spec to somebody else and say, look, this is the code I've written and this is what I'm using to test it, and everything you need is there to deploy that cloud and to run these tests that I've been, to exercise the feature in the way that I've been exercising.
Very cool. So I think we probably should point out that we do run Tempest Smoke tests against the full cloud deployments. That's not currently wrapped in Mojo. It kind of predates our move to using the Mojo specs. And as Liam mentioned, we just have a bit of work to do to put that into our OpenStack Mojo helpers. But the Tempest is quite a good indicator as to the health of the packaging and features and things like that. And so we definitely pay attention to that. We don't necessarily automatically gate on Tempest because it also is very fluid, right? If we're always running Tempest tests from master, that can change over time. And so it's difficult to gate on something that is also fluid, but we definitely pay attention to it. I watch the results. I know James is also pretty well connected with the Tempest results that we put out. I wonder if there are any questions so far.
Question on the Mojo. I know it's pretty new, and we've got a lot of CI stuff that we're already doing, but and Mojo is pretty new in our testing efforts. Are we going to add that to CI in some way, shape, or form? I mean, it probably wouldn't make sense to run on every commit, but what are the plans around that?
Yeah, so we do have some automation with the Mojo specs already. Mainly those are time triggered, right? So on any given Monday morning, you can see what the weekend's results were for Charm Helper Sync or an HA test or a full stack deploy of the LTS. We could certainly trigger any of those based on events in Launchpad or on a merge proposal. It just becomes a matter of trying to predict what the impact to the test infrastructure will be. I think we've hit kind of a critical mass in our per commit type of triggers, and that's the nature of switching to kind of a two-phased test approach where we'll do this basic amulet test always on these proposals, and then with probably a +1 from one of the team, the bot will go ahead and kick off a more detailed test. So that the reviewer can then wait for that to finish and then go ahead and do the merge if everything is good. I think that from a testing perspective, or certainly from test contribution perspective, we've I believe agreed that if somebody comes to us and says, hey, I've got a scenario, I need to have coverage for scenario X because we're doing this at a customer, our response from the Charm OpenStack Charm team is great. Let's put that into a spec, because what a Mojo spec is a really cool way to be able to express what you want to deploy, things you want to do after that deployment, and tests you want to run against that deployment. And so there's, I don't believe there's anything else that we have tool set wise that can do all of that in one place. And so it makes Mojo specs a natural place to be doing that. There is a bit of overlap with the amulet tests. And that's understandable that we may have some of the same tests happening in different places. And currently, those unfortunately don't use a shared library. So we may have some tests in some amulet code that would be useful over in Mojo spec helpers. And I think that's something we want to talk about a bit more at some point. But it's there are bigger fish to fry, I suppose. So in terms of, I suppose, what to expect from third parties, right? We have more and more folks, as people certainly in the SDN and NFV world are contributing via OIL and other programs. We have third parties that are hoping to land code within the charms themselves, and those do hit our automated CI in some cases, and so. The expectation is that as whether you're a third party or part of this team or someone who works for Canonical or just a charmer in general, once you make a merge proposal against one of our next charms, it's going to trigger a series of events and you're going to start to see input on that merge proposal. Some of it's fairly verbose, and with our switch to bundle tester around the corner, I think that some of that will be condensed a bit, so a little bit of the noise level will go down. But on the flip side, the noise level is a good thing from the developer perspective, as you really want to have that safety trigger there and that timely feedback. So Any other questions in channel?
I don't see any at the moment.
Nope. James, Liam, Corey, any other things that we can talk about from the testing perspective and what our plans are?
I had something actually. So we talk quite a lot about how we've built out our CI around charms and you know how we exercise OpenStack fairly extensively in multi-node deployments, you know, to support stable updates and such like, and to exercise features. I thought it was also worth touching on some of the other testing that we have, especially around what happens in the archive, you know, before packages actually get in. So we've had auto package testing enabled for most of the core OpenStack packages and dependencies, probably for 3 or 4 cycles now, and they perform some basic validation of you know, that the packages are installable, and you know, the daemons start and the database can be synchronized and stuff like that. And they provide us a very much an initial first gate, you know, which is, you know, the package going into the archive and having a basic level of validation against it first, which is really important. I think we have a good opportunity to improve on that in the 15.10 cycle. Most of the upstream projects in OpenStack now have functional tests enabled in their code bases, which, you know, have broader requirements than the unit tests that we run during package build. So they may require MySQL or Rabbit or whatever to be configured in a specific way. So I think expanding our auto package tests to include exercising upstream functional test suites against different database backends, different messaging, whatever it might be, is a really valuable addition to the kind of multi-phase, multi-level testing approach that we exercise with OpenStack on Ubuntu and for the charms on Ubuntu. So that's something I'll probably just try and work into the blueprints that we'll be managing for this cycle, but I think it should be relatively easy to enable. I've pulled the specs on how upstream set up their functional test images, and it broadly is a big install list of packages and some base config, and then most of the functional tests will work out of the box. So I think that's definitely worth exercising that and having a good look at that during 15.10 as we move towards 16.04.
All right, Marco, got any input from the ecosystem team perspective?
No, you guys were super thorough. I'm excited. It's actually very nice to know that these components, which are, I mean, being deployed regularly in customer sites and in production clouds, are so well vetted and tested. It's quite reassuring from the consumer standpoint. I'm looking forward to, you know, seeing how we can shape Bundle Tester to suit your needs and getting that kind of as the de facto test runner so that we have a kind of concise view of how charms work across the grid and such. But I don't really have any other input.
Very good, very good. So if I'm not mistaken, Mr. Cheppy here is the Amulet author, right? Or at least maintainer. So thanks.
Yeah,
thanks for the framework.
A really long time ago.
I think he gets credit to both of those roles.
Mr. Amulet. Very good.
Yes, thankfully there's now more people helping maintain it, so it gets better eyes on for quality control. But there's lots of cool stuff from just the feedback talking with you guys last couple of weeks and other people using Amulet. We'll be doing a lot of fixes to that because a lot of the things that we worked around in Amulet are actually in Juju Core proper now. So Amulet itself will become much more robust and a simpler framework for executing things. Yeah.
Very cool. I believe that's all I've got, unless there are any other questions. It doesn't look like the channel has any questions. I know there's a bit of a delay. Maybe we'll give it a second and see if anybody has any last hand raises.
Yeah, we'll give them 30 seconds to a minute. We just sit here, dead air, twiddle thumbs. It's pretty exciting.
One thing I'd add is that that I worked in the deploy from source work for the charms this last cycle, and the Amulet tests are really helpful in adding that support because they test different things. You know, like they test what services are up on a unit, test the relation, and all those things, and And if services aren't up or if relations are wrong, then obviously things aren't good. So just being able to add, run those tests on code here and there was really helpful. Rather than deploying an entire cloud, having like a 4-unit cloud was a lot quicker to test. So very helpful.
Cool. Yeah, definitely. So I guess the other thing that we didn't really touch on is the coverage level. I think this last cycle we pretty much doubled the number of charms that have this kind of same treatment of basic amulet tests, and that leaves about a third of them to go. And my personal mission is to make sure every one of them possess that yet this cycle. We'll see.
Very cool. I
Excellent.
don't see any questions in the room, so I think this will wrap it up unless you guys have anything else you want to talk about.
All good. Thank you, Marco, for hosting.
Yeah, thank you.
Thanks, everybody, for joining.
Okay. Cheers. Thanks, guys.
Thanks,
Bye.
Ryan.
Thank you. Bye.
So next up, there's the OpenStack Kilo updates and roadmaps and LexQT next generation of Ubuntu. So those will be starting in about 30 minutes.